when exhaustion is no longer physical but existential. There is a kind of exhaustion that does not show in the mirror, but weighs on the chest. It is not the tiredness of the body aft. On the inside, something is silently unraveling. Maybe you are tired of being strong, tired of enduring, tired of not being allowed to fall apart because you feel that if you stop, everything around you will collapse with you. There is a subtle fear that accompanies this state. If I slow down, everything will spiral out of control. And so, you keep going. You keep going even when your heart feels heavy. You keep going even when your mind will not stop. You keep going even when your body asks for rest. But rest does not reach what truly hurts. This is not physical exhaustion. It is existential. It is the kind that is born from constant responsibility, emotional vigilance, the need to sustain expectations. It is when you sleep, but do not rest. When you close your eyes, but your mind keeps running. The body even tries to relax, but the nervous system remains on alert, as if something were always about to go wrong. Science explains that when we live under prolonged stress, our brain learns not to fully switch off. Cortisol remains elevated, breathing becomes shallow, muscles stay slightly tense, the body is lying down, the soul is not. Maybe you recognize yourself in this. Maybe you are listening to these words while feeling a weight that is hard to explain, a subtle tightness in your chest, a lump in your throat that appears without a clear reason, a desire to cry that you swallow because it's not the right time. And so the days pass, and you continue being functional, and you continue being needed, and you continue being strong. But there is a profound difference between functioning and being well. And sometimes the world applauds the one who functions, even when that person is collapsing inside. That creates a silent loneliness, because no one sees the invisible effort you make just to remain standing. No one sees the exhausting internal dialogue. No one sees how much you demand from yourself. And maybe you have learned not to show it. Maybe you have learned that weakness is dangerous, that stopping is failure, that asking for help is a burden. In the Bible, in Psalm 13, David begins with a question that crosses centuries and still echoes in the human soul. How long, Lord? This is not a polite sentence. It is not a polished prayer. It is a raw outcry. It is the cry of someone who is too tired to pretend strength. And what is most remarkable is that this question is recorded as prayer. God did not reject that honesty. God received it. That means something very important for you right now. Your exhaustion is not a spiritual failure. Your discouragement is not proof of divine absence. Your weariness is not a sign of moral weakness. It is a sign that you are human, and humans have limits. Humans feel. Humans become overwhelmed. Humans need to stop. Imagine a phone that still shows 40% battery. Visually, it seems sufficient, but dozens of apps are running in the background, consuming energy without you realizing it. Unresolved conversations, silent fears, accumulated guilt, expectations you carry alone. The problem is not that you are empty, it is that you are overloaded. Your soul is not without energy. It is drained by invisible processes. And when the soul is like that, even simple things feel heavy. Deciding what to eat, responding to a message, getting out of bed. Everything requires more than it should, and you begin to wonder if something is wrong with you. But maybe it is not. Maybe you are just too tired. If you can, right now, take a real pause. Feel the weight of your body where you are. Notice your breathing. Maybe it is shallow. Maybe it is fast. Do not try to change it yet. Just notice you are here. You made it to this moment. Even tired, you are still breathing. That already means something. And now, let us turn this exhaustion into prayer. Not a perfect prayer, not a beautiful prayer, but a true prayer. Lord, I am tired in places that sleep cannot reach. I am tired of being strong all the time, tired of pretending everything is fine when it is not, tired of carrying responsibilities that seem endless. If my soul is bending, hold me up. If my mind is racing, slow my thoughts. If I feel forgotten, remind me that you're not absent in my silence. Today I do not ask for complex answers. I ask for breath. I ask for peace. I ask for your presence with me in this wait. Remain for a few seconds in that feeling. Do not try to fix anything. Do not try to understand everything. Just stay. Sometimes transformation does not begin with strength. It begins with permission. Permission to admit, I am tired. Permission to feel. Permission not to be the strongest one in the room. There is a presence that is not intimidated by your exhaustion. There is a care that does not depend on your performance. And perhaps, in this exact moment, the most spiritual step you can take is not to do more. It is to stop. To stop and recognize that your soul needs to be cared for. If today you feel like you cannot go on, that does not mean it is over. It may mean it is time to rest under a faithful presence. And as you breathe now, slowly and deeply, a simple truth begins to settle inside you. You do not have to carry the whole world. You do not have to be strong all the time. You are allowed to be human and still be loved. 2. The invisible burnout. When responsibility becomes identity, there is an almost imperceptible moment when responsibility stops being something you do and becomes who you believe you are. You do not just take on tasks. You take on people. You take on expectations. You take on the emotional stability of the environment. And without realizing it, you begin to measure your worth by how much you can endure in silence. If you can handle it, you are strong. If you fix it, you are needed. If you do not complain, you are admirable. And little by little, your identity blends with your capacity to withstand. Maybe deep down, there is a silent belief guiding all of this. I am only valuable if I can handle everything. Or perhaps, if I fail, I will disappoint everyone. These sentences are not always conscious, but they operate like internal commands. Your nervous system learns that relaxing is dangerous, that slowing down may mean losing control. And so, even when you try to rest, something inside you remains on alert. Neuroscience shows that chronic stress keeps the body in a constant state of vigilance. Cortisol continues circulating. The mind keeps scanning for risks. The heart does not fully slow down. That is why, sometimes, you lie down to rest and feel restless, as if stopping were wrong, as if there were something urgent you are forgetting. But often, there is nothing urgent. There is only an internal pattern that has learned to survive this way. There is a delicate revelation here, and perhaps a slightly uncomfortable one. Part of your exhaustion does not come only from too many tasks. It comes from the impossibility of being fragile. It comes from never allowing yourself to say, "Today, I can't." It comes from carrying the role of the strong one for so long that you forgot what it feels like to simply be human. Carrying water for everyone may seem noble, and many times it is. But if you never drink from that water yourself, your own well begins to dry up. And when the well runs dry, you do not just feel tired, you feel empty, irritable, disconnected, and sometimes guilty for feeling that way. Because you shouldn't. But you should. Your body and your soul are trying to get your attention. Fatigue is a language. Exhaustion is a message. It is not an accusation. It is a signal. It is as if your soul were saying, I need care too. Maybe you have never delegated because you believe no one will do it as well as you. Maybe you do not ask for help because you learned that depending on others is weakness. But look honestly, is this strategy sustaining you, or is it draining you? Is it strengthening your life, or is it eroding your peace? There is a quiet courage in admitting limits. There is a mature strength in recognizing that you were not created to carry everything alone, and that does not diminish your worth. On the contrary, it humanizes you. This week, try something simple but deeply symbolic. Choose one responsibility you can postpone, simplify, or share. It can be small, maybe a task that does not need to be perfect, maybe a conversation that can wait, maybe a request for help you always avoid making. It is not about abandoning your duties. It is about reminding your soul that it does not need to prove its worth through constant exhaustion. Take a deep breath now and ask yourself, honestly and without judgment, who am I when I am not fixing anything? Who am I when I am not being strong for someone? If that question creates discomfort, just observe it. Sometimes discomfort is the beginning of reconnection. You are not only what you endure. You are not only what you deliver. You are not only what you fix. Before any responsibility, you are someone who feels, who gets tired, who needs rest. And God does not relate to you only through what you do. He relates to who you are, even when you are tired, even when you cannot produce, even when all you can do is breathe. Maybe today is the day to begin separating your identity from your exhaustion. Maybe today is the day to realize that responsibility is part of your life, but it is not your essence. And when that distinction begins to form within you, something softens, something slows down, something begins to remember that rest is sacred too. 3. Be careful with, I just need to push a little more. There is a sentence that sounds harmless, but often turns into a silent trap. I just need to hold on a little longer. You repeat it like a survival mantra. After this week, it will get better. After this project, things will calm down. After this phase, I will rest. And so, the finish line keeps moving forward, as if rest were always just ahead, but never exactly here. The brain loves the feeling of completing something. Every finished task releases small doses of dopamine, that chemical that creates a sense of reward. You feel relief. You feel like you conquered another day. But what almost no one realizes is that dopamine rewards completion, not sustainability. It encourages finishing, not balancing. And so you enter a cycle. Intense effort, brief relief, new effort, new relief. True rest never stabilizes. There is something deeply human in this. You are not being weak. You are trying to survive. You are trying to keep everything in order. But there is a difference between healthy perseverance and compulsive self-demand. Perseverance is moving through a difficult season, knowing it is limited. Compulsive self-demand is turning your entire life into a difficult season. Maybe you learned that giving up is wrong, that slowing down is failure, that stopping is a sign of weakness. But there is a question that needs to be asked sincerely. Is continuing to push actually solving anything, or is it only postponing a greater collapse? Because there are moments when insisting is not strength, it is denial of your own limits. God does not measure you only by your endurance. He is not holding a stopwatch to see how long you can withstand pressure. Mature spirituality is not about enduring indefinitely. It is about discerning when to move forward and when to stop. It is about wisdom, not just strength. Slowly replace within yourself the phrase, "I need to push through," with something more conscious. What is this exhaustion trying to teach me? Maybe it is teaching you that you have crossed your own limits. Maybe it is showing you that there are areas of your life that need adjustment. Maybe it is revealing that you have been ignoring important signals. Imagine a screw that is already worn down. The more you try to tighten it, the more it loses its shape. The intention is firmness. The result is damage. Often, continuing to force a situation that is already at its limit only increases frustration and the sense of failure. Not because you are incapable, but because the method is wrong. Pause for a moment and observe your body. Where do you feel tension right now? In your jaw? In your shoulders? In your chest? These areas often carry the story of just a little more. Every contraction is an attempt to maintain control. Every shallow breath is an effort to remain functional. But functional does not mean healthy. There is a quiet wisdom in the body. When it begins to signal exhaustion, it is not sabotaging you, it is protecting you. Emotional fatigue is often the brake that prevents greater damage. The problem is that we have learned to ignore the brake and press the accelerator anyway. Maybe today, you do not need more motivation. Maybe you need permission. Permission to recognize that pushing is not the only option. Permission to slow down before something inside you breaks. Permission to understand that maturity is not about enduring everything. It is about knowing when something needs to change. Ask yourself, honestly and without judgment, if I continue at this pace for 6 more months, where will I be emotionally? That question is not meant to scare you. It is meant to bring awareness, because awareness is the first step toward real transformation. You do not need to prove your strength to God. You do not need to prove your endurance to the world. True stability is born when you learn to listen to your own limits before they start screaming. And maybe, in this moment, your soul is not asking for more effort. It is asking for attention, for the silent factor that drains you, unspoken resentment. There is a kind of weight that does not come from what you do, but from what you swallow. Words that got stuck, conversations that never happened, responses you wanted to give, but did not. You said, "It's fine," when it was not. You smiled when you wanted to cry. You agreed when something inside you was screaming that it was not fair. And every time that happens, a small part of your energy is consumed. Silent resentment does not show up as explosive anger. It shows up as fatigue, as constant irritation, as impatience without a clear reason. Because suppressing emotions requires effort. The brain has to keep the experience pushed out of awareness, and that consumes mental resources. It is like keeping multiple files open in the background of a system. You do not see them, but you feel the weight. Maybe you learned that expressing displeasure is wrong, that showing frustration is a lack of spirituality, that forgiving means pretending it did not hurt. But the truth is, your soul grows tired when your mouth refuses to speak the truth. Not an aggressive truth, not an accusing truth, but an honest truth. How many times have you said, "It's not a problem," when it actually was? How many times have you swallowed disappointment to maintain external peace while losing internal peace? That accumulation does not disappear. It turns into tension in the body, emotional distance, an exhaustion that seems to have no explanation. Healthy spirituality does not require you to deny what you feel. On the contrary, it invites honesty. In the Psalms, we see men and women presenting their frustrations, their doubts, their outrage to God, not with disrespect, but with sincerity. Prayer is not a stage where you have to appear balanced. It is a place where you are allowed to be real. There is something liberating about admitting, "That hurt me. That was unfair. I felt disappointed." When you acknowledge it, something inside you relaxes, because the energy that was once used to suppress can now be used to integrate. And integration heals. Today, I want to suggest a simple and profound practice. Take a piece of paper, or if you prefer, close your eyes and do this mentally. Speak to God as someone who truly listens. Say exactly what you are hurt about. Do not filter it. Do not decorate it. Do not try to sound more evolved than you actually feel. You can say, "I am angry." You can say, "I felt forgotten." You can say, "I gave so much, and no one noticed." There is no shock in heaven when you speak the truth. There is welcome. Imagine a pot of boiling water with the lid sealed tightly. The steam begins to build pressure. The pot begins to shake. The problem is not that the steam exists. The problem is that there is no space for it to escape. Repressed emotions are like that. They do not disappear. They accumulate pressure. And when that pressure becomes too great, it manifests as emotional exhaustion. You cannot explain why you are so tired, but part of your energy is being spent sustaining an internal narrative that is not true. The narrative that everything is fine when it is not. There is courage in being honest with God. There is maturity in recognizing emotional limits. That does not make you less spiritual. It makes you more whole, because integrity is not perfection. It is coherence between what you feel and what you admit. Maybe today, your exhaustion is asking for something very specific. Truth, gentle truth, truth without spectacle, truth spoken in silence, in a dark room, with restrained tears. And when you begin to name what was hidden, something shifts, not because the problem disappears immediately, but because you stop fighting yourself. And when you stop fighting yourself, the soul slowly begins to regain strength. 5. When prayer feels empty, and why that doesn't mean you're failing. There is a delicate moment in the spiritual journey when you pray and feel nothing. The words come out, but they seem to reach nowhere. You try to focus, try to create a quieter environment, try to repeat phrases that once touched your heart, but now everything feels dry, distant, as if heaven were silent. And then a dangerous thought appears. Maybe I am failing. Maybe my faith is weak. Maybe God has pulled away. That interpretation hurts even more than the exhaustion itself, because in addition to being tired, you begin to carry spiritual guilt. But it is important to understand something deeply liberating. Emotional intensity is not the same as spiritual depth. Feeling a lot does not mean you are more connected, and feeling nothing does not mean you have been abandoned. When the nervous system is overloaded, it can shift into protection mode. It reduces sensations to preserve energy. That includes spiritual sensations. It is not coldness, it is survival. In Psalm 13, David begins in despair. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? He does not begin with confidence. He begins with pain. And throughout the psalm, something shifts. Not necessarily the circumstances, but the perspective. He ends by saying, I trust in your unfailing love. That transition is not emotionally explosive. It is a conscious choice in the middle of unanswered questions. Maybe your prayer today does not need to be intense. It needs to be honest. It needs to be simple. It needs to be repeated, even without feeling. There is something deeply transformative about remaining, even when emotion does not follow. Because mature faith is not dependent on sensations. It is sustained by decision. Imagine a seed buried in the soil. Beneath the ground, there is no light, no wind, no applause. If the seed could feel, it might think nothing is happening. But invisibly, life is emerging, roots are forming, structures are being created. Real growth is silent. Maybe you're in a subterranean season of your spiritual life. There is no euphoria, no chills, no intense tears. But that does not mean God is absent. It may mean something deeper is being built within you, something less emotional and more stable. Today, I want to suggest something very simple. Choose a psalm. It can be Psalm 13 again. It can be another one that speaks to your heart. Read it out loud, slowly, not as someone fulfilling an obligation, but as someone having a conversation. If one sentence touches you even slightly, repeat it. If it does not, continue anyway. Allow the words to do what your emotions are not yet able to do. The brain learns through repetition. When you verbalize words of trust, even in the middle of emptiness, you begin to create new internal pathways. Gradually, the nervous system understands that it is safe to trust again, safe to relax, safe to remain. And remember, God does not demand spiritual performance. He does not require you to feel something specific in order to be heard. He does not measure your faith by the volume of your emotions. He welcomes your presence, even when that presence is tired, even when it is confused, even when all it can say is, I am still here. If your prayer feels empty today, perhaps it is, in fact, too deep to be measured by feelings. Perhaps it is the most sincere prayer you have ever prayed, because it is born from persistence, not from euphoria. And there is something very precious about continuing to speak with God, even when everything feels silent. Silence is not abandonment. Sometimes it is maturation, and you are not failing for feeling less. You are walking through a human season and still loved. 6. The error of isolating. When you're overwhelmed, when the weight becomes too heavy, the almost automatic impulse is to pull away. You begin responding to fewer messages. You cancel commitments. You avoid explaining what you're feeling. Part of that comes from the desire not to worry anyone. Part comes from the fear of seeming weak. And part comes from something even quieter, the sense that no one would truly understand. So you withdraw. You become quieter. You handle everything alone. You endure a little longer, and on the outside, it may even look like you are simply being more reserved. But on the inside, loneliness begins to amplify your thoughts. Because the brain, when isolated, tends to ruminate. It revisits conversations, recreates scenarios, amplifies fears, and the more you think alone, the heavier everything feels. Neuroscience shows that human connection regulates the nervous system. A welcoming gaze, a calm voice, a safe presence help the body move out of a threat state. But when you isolate yourself, your system remains without that support, and emotional exhaustion deepens. Even spiritual figures experience this. Elijah, after a great victory, collapsed when he withdrew and hid. He did not need a sermon. He needed care. He needed rest. He needed presence. And God did not treat him with rebuke. He treated him with food, with sleep, with companionship. Maybe you are doing exactly what feels safest, pulling away so you do not fall apart in front of others. But there is a difference between restorative silence and defensive isolation. Restorative silence is a conscious choice to recharge. Defensive isolation is an attempt to hide pain. Ask yourself gently, am I withdrawing to care for myself or to protect myself from being seen? If the answer is the second, there is no guilt in that. There is only a learned pattern. Maybe you learned that showing vulnerability leads to rejection. Maybe you were misunderstood before, and so now you prefer not to risk it. But continuing alone under excessive weight is not strength. It is overload. You do not have to tell everything to everyone. You do not need to make a public announcement of your exhaustion. But you can choose one safe person, someone who has already shown empathy, and say simply, I'm not okay. That simple sentence opens a small crack of light. It does not require detailed explanations. It does not require drama, only truth. Strong bridges are not supported by a single pillar. They have multiple supports. The soul works the same way. You can be resilient, responsible, strong, and still need support. And perhaps the hardest part is not finding someone. It is allowing yourself to be helped, allowing someone to see you without the armor, allowing someone to know that you get tired too. There is something deeply healing about being seen without having to appear strong, about hearing, I understand, about realizing that your pain is not exaggeration, not weakness, not drama. It is human. Today, I want to invite you to take a small but meaningful step. Think of a safe person. Just think. Notice what arises in your body when you imagine saying, I need to talk. If fear appears, observe it. If resistance appears, welcome it. You do not have to act immediately, but recognize that isolation does not have to be permanent. You were not created to carry everything alone, and admitting that does not diminish your dignity. It expands your humanity. And paradoxically, it is in that space of vulnerability that true strength begins to form. A 3-step night reset. When your soul feels overloaded, when night falls, silence tends to amplify everything you manage to ignore during the day. Distractions fade, responsibilities are temporarily suspended, and your mind begins revisiting what was left unresolved. It's in this moment that many people feel the weight increase. The body is tired, but the thoughts are racing. The soul longs for rest, but cannot seem to power down. So before you simply try to fall asleep, I want to guide you through a small ritual of inner reorganization. It's not mystical. It's not complicated. It's a simple alignment between awareness, emotion, and spirituality. A gentle reset before sleep. Step 1. Specifically, name what is draining you. Don't just say, I'm I'm tired. Go further. Is it financial pressure? A family conflict? Fear of the future? Accumulated guilt? When you name something clearly, the brain reduces the sense of diffuse threat. What once felt like an invisible monster begins to take defined shape, and whatever has a name loses part of its power to paralyze. Notice how your body reacts when you name things. Maybe an involuntary sigh appears. Maybe a tension eases slightly. Clarity reduces chaos. When everything feels unbearably heavy, often the problem isn't just the weight, it's the confusion. Step 2. Separate what is yours from what isn't. This step is deeply liberating. Ask yourself honestly, of all this, what is truly my responsibility? And what am I trying to control that does not depend on me? Often, we carry worries that belong to other people's decisions, other people's reactions, other people's choices, and that is exhausting. You might even imagine 2 mental columns. In the first, place what you can influence through concrete action. In the second, what lies beyond your immediate reach. When you make that distinction, your nervous system begins to move out of a constant state of alert, because it realizes it does not need to monitor the entire universe. Step 3. Pray Psalm 13 as a dialogue, not a performance. Read slowly, "How long, Lord?" and then respond in your own words. Say what that "how long" means in your life right now. Then read, "But I trust in your unfailing love," and respond again. What does trust mean today, even while exhausted? Don't turn this into a polished speech. Turn it into a real conversation. When you do this, something shifts within your nervous system. You move out of survival mode, where everything feels like a threat, and begin entering conscious surrender. Not surrender as giving up, but as lucid release, as someone saying, "I acknowledge my limits, and I choose not to fight against them tonight." Imagine wires completely tangled. If you try to yank one forcefully, the knot tightens. But when you pause, observe, and begin patiently separating them, the entanglement loosens. This small ritual does exactly that with your thoughts. Now, as you breathe more deeply, notice that you do not need to solve everything before sleeping. You only need to organize what is yours and release what is not. The night does not demand productivity. It invites restoration, and perhaps, for the first time in a long while, you allow sleep not to be an escape, but an act of care, because your soul does not need more pressure right now. It needs inner order. It needs gentleness. It needs to remember that resting is also a form of faith. 8. The exhaustion of trying to control outcomes. There is a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come only from what you do, but from what you try to predict. You anticipate conversations. You imagine scenarios. You calculate possibilities. You try to prepare for every response, every reaction, every unexpected turn. And underneath it all, there is a persistent thought. If I control enough, nothing will fall apart. But life does not respond to absolute control. And the more tightly you try to hold everything in your own hands, the more tension accumulates in your body. Your shoulders grow rigid. Your jaw tightens. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your nervous system remains in a state of constant vigilance because control requires continuous monitoring, and continuous monitoring is exhausting. There is a central pain here, the fear that if you relax, something bad will happen. Maybe you have lived through moments when you were caught off guard. Maybe you learned that relaxing is dangerous, so you developed the ability to predict, organize, anticipate. At some point, that brought safety, but now it may be costing you your peace. The cognitive truth is both simple and difficult. Excessive control does not eliminate uncertainty. It only increases anxiety, because deep down, you know you cannot guarantee everything, and fighting against the inevitable is deeply draining. Spiritually, there is a difference between responsibility and omnipotence. Responsibility is doing your part with awareness. Omnipotence is trying to assume the role of the one who sustains the universe, and that role is not yours. It never was. Surrender is not passivity. It is not crossing your arms and doing nothing. Surrender is discernment. It is doing what is within your reach and then releasing what exceeds your limits. It is an act of spiritual and emotional maturity. Now, if you can, imagine your hands tightly clenched. Feel the tension. That is the sensation of trying to control everything. Now, slowly, imagine opening your hands. Not to abandon, but to trust. There is relief in that symbolic gesture. Take a piece of paper, if you want to make this concrete. Draw 2 columns. In the first, write what I can influence. In the second, what does not depend on me. Be honest. You may realize that much of your anxiety lives in the second column. Holding sand too tightly causes it to slip through your fingers faster. Excessive control produces the same effect. The more you try to guarantee outcomes, the more you feel them slipping away, and that sense of losing control feeds the cycle of tension even further. Maybe today, your soul is tired not only from tasks, but from constant vigilance, tired of having to predict the future, tired of assuming responsibilities that are not yours. And perhaps the most spiritual step you can take right now is to say in prayer, God, I will do my part. The rest, I entrust to you. Trust does not eliminate challenges, but it changes your inner posture toward them. When you accept that you are not holding everything together alone, something relaxes in your chest. Your breathing deepens. Your mind slows down a little, not because everything has been solved, but because you have stopped fighting what you cannot control. And in that conscious surrender, exhaustion begins to lose its intensity, because half of your energy is no longer being spent trying to sustain the impossible. When tiredness is actually grief in disguise, there is a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from too many tasks, lack of sleep, or external pressure. It comes from something quieter. It comes from losses that were never fully acknowledged. It comes from expectations that were never fulfilled. It comes from versions of life you imagined that never came to be. Sometimes you're not just tired. You're grieving a relationship that wasn't what you dreamed it would be, grieving a season of life that ended, grieving a change in your health, grieving a prayer that seemed like it would have a different answer. And when grief is not named, it turns into a diffuse weight. You wake up tired. You walk around tired. You live tired. But you can't quite explain why. When the brain is dealing with unprocessed loss, it remains in a constant state of adaptation. It tries to reorganize expectations. It tries to recalculate the future. It tries to figure out what to do with the emptiness. That consumes emotional energy, and the result is often fatigue. Maybe you're trying to motivate yourself when what you actually need is permission to grieve. Maybe you're chasing productivity when what your soul is asking for is acknowledgement of pain. Because before you move forward, something inside you needs to be seen. There is a profound difference between weakness and grief. Weakness is giving up. Grief is love that no longer has a place to rest. It is memory. It is attachment. It is hope that had to change form. Ask yourself gently, what am I losing that I haven't yet had the courage to admit? It may be something concrete. It may be something symbolic. It may be a season of your life. It may be a version of yourself that was left behind. Your soul may not need more encouragement. It may need permission to say, this hurt. It may need space to recognize that not everything turned out the way you wanted, and it is okay to feel that. Today, if you can, create a small ritual. Light a candle, or simply close your eyes in silence, and name what you're mourning. Say quietly, I am sad about. Don't rush the process. Don't turn it into a positive speech. Just acknowledge it. Imagine a house that has experienced a loss, but no one talks about it. The atmosphere feels heavy, not because there is noise, but because there is too much silence. When you bring words to grief, the internal atmosphere begins to shift, not because the loss disappears, but because it is no longer ignored. God does not withdraw from sadness. He does not demand that you recover quickly. He does not measure your spirituality by how fast you pull yourself back together. There is a kind of comfort that only arrives when you stop pretending it doesn't hurt. Maybe your tiredness is a request to pause and cry what was lost. Maybe your exhaustion is your body saying you have carried unprocessed pain for too long. And recognizing that does not make you weak. It makes you honest. And honesty creates space for healing. Not instant healing, not dramatic transformation, but an internal reorganization, a gradual relief, a breath that begins to deepen just a little. If you are tired, maybe it is not only from tasks. Maybe it is from trying to be strong while something inside you is still grieving. And today, perhaps for the first time in a long while, you can allow that part to be seen and held. Conclusion: resting without guilt under a faithful presence. After all of this, perhaps you're realizing that your exhaustion isn't simple. It has layers. It carries accumulated responsibilities, excessive control, unspoken words, hidden grief, and above all, a soul that has tried to be strong for too long. You will feel responsibility if you bring to the tub. However, that question is not a sign of unbelief. It is a sign of relationship. Only someone who is still speaking to God asks, how long? Only someone who still expects to be heard cries out. And throughout the psalm, something shifts. Not necessarily the external circumstances, but the internal posture. David ends by saying, I trust. Notice the transition from despair to trust. Not because everything was resolved, but because he chose to rest under a faithful presence. That is profoundly therapeutic, because the human nervous system needs safety in order to relax, and faith, when healthy, offers exactly that, the sense that you are not alone in the battle. Night is not failure. Night is part of the rhythm of creation. The earth rests. The body slows down. The heart reduces its pace. Darkness does not mean abandonment. It means restoration in process. And perhaps your soul is exactly in that cycle right now. Not at the peak of productivity, but in the phase of necessary rest. There is a quiet guilt many people carry. The guilt of resting. The guilt of not being able to handle everything. The guilt of needing a pause. But resting is not weakness. It is biological wisdom. It is spiritual intelligence. It is recognizing that you are a creature, not the creator of the universe. Now, before we close, I invite you to pray again, not as someone desperate, but as someone consciously surrendering. God, as I close my eyes tonight, I release the pressure to fix everything. I release the need to control every outcome. If tomorrow still holds challenges, may I face them renewed on the inside. Restore what stress has thinned. Heal what responsibility has worn down. Teach my soul that resting is not weakness. It is wisdom. Guard my sleep. Calm my thoughts. And remind me that even when I am tired of everything, you are not tired of me. Remain for a few seconds, breathing after this prayer. Inhale deeply. Feel the air entering. Exhale slowly. Feel the weight leaving. Your body understands this rhythm. Your mind begins to follow. Your soul realizes it can loosen its grip a little. Faith is not an escape from reality. It is the courage to face it with support. A soul that learns to rest in God does not run from life. It returns to life more stable, clearer, more whole, not because everything became easy, but because it stopped fighting alone. And now I leave you with a question to carry into the silence of this night. If God is truly present here, right now, as you breathe, can you allow your soul to rest under that care? You don't need to answer out loud. Just notice. Perhaps, for the first time in a long while, you don't need to push. You don't need to prove. You don't need to hold everything together. You can simply rest. And as you remain there, perhaps lying down, perhaps sitting in silence, let these final words settle within you without hurry. You don't need to understand everything right now. You don't need to solve everything right now. You don't need to be the strongest version of yourself right now. There is a time to plant, a time to build, a time to fight, and there is a time to rest. If your soul is exhausted, perhaps this is the time for rest. Notice how your body reacts when you consider that possibility. There may be resistance. An inner voice may say, there is still too much to do, but observe that voice gently. It learned to protect you through constant effort. Thank it, and calmly tell yourself, now is the time to pause. Your worth does not decrease when you rest. Your dignity is not reduced when you admit you are tired. God's presence in your life does not depend on your productivity. It does not fluctuate based on your performance. It remains constant, faithful, quiet, and steady, even when you are fragile. Perhaps you have spent too long believing you need to earn care, that you must reach a certain standard in order to be sustained. But divine care does not operate as a reward for performance. It functions as shelter, and shelter is offered especially when the storm is strong. If there has been guilt within you for being tired, allow it to dissolve now. Guilt does not restore energy. Guilt only increases the weight. What restores is acceptance. It is recognizing that you are human, that you have limits, that you move through seasons, and seasons do not define your destiny. They are simply part of the journey. Feel your breathing again. Inhale more deeply. Let the air fill your chest. Hold it for a moment and release it slowly. As the air leaves, imagine the accumulated pressure beginning to leave as well. Maybe not all of it, but some of it. Even a small portion is enough to begin change. You do not need to wake up tomorrow transformed. You do not need to resolve years of overload in a single night. True transformation is gradual. almost imperceptible. It is built through small choices, naming what hurts, asking for help when needed, releasing what you cannot control, allowing yourself to feel, resting without guilt. And when tomorrow comes, perhaps the challenges will still be there. Perhaps some situations will continue demanding your attention, but something inside you may be different, a little more aware, a little more aligned, a little less alone, because now you understand that exhaustion is not an enemy. It is a signal that something needs care, a signal that you have crossed limits, a signal that your soul longs for reconnection. If today you said, "I am tired," that is already an act of courage. If you prayed even without feeling much, that is already mature faith. If you acknowledged your grief, your overload, your desire to control, that is already awareness awakening, and awareness is the beginning of healing. Let the night do what it was created to do. Let the silence work gently. Let your body enter rest without the obligation to monitor everything. There is a presence caring for you right now, not distant, not absent, here. You may not feel it intensely. There may not be a strong emotion, but there is support. There is care. There is a love that does not grow tired when you grow tired. And if tomorrow, at some point, the weight tries to return in full force, remember this simple truth. You do not have to carry everything at once. One step, one breath, one surrender at a time. Now, allow yourself to close your eyes. Allow your inner rhythm to slow. Allow yourself to rest under a faithful presence. You are not alone. Your pain is understood, and there is steady care surrounding you in this very moment. Rest.